Imagine sailing under the blazing sun, surrounded by an endless ocean but not a single drop of clean water to drink. Pirates weren't just fighting navies or hunting treasure, they were battling thirst, disease, and desperation. What did they do when their water turned green or when barrels ran dry in the middle of nowhere? When people think about pirates, the image that often comes to mind includes dramatic sword fights, buried treasure, and daring sea battles. But the truth is, one of the biggest daily challenges pirates faced wasn't other ships or hostile navies, it was staying hydrated. Among the many hardships of life at sea, finding and keeping clean drinking water was one of the toughest. It might sound simple, but it was a constant, often life-threatening problem that shaped how pirates lived, sailed, and even fought. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the so-called golden age of piracy, ships could easily store dry and preserved food. Salted meat, hardtack, a type of dried biscuit, and dried beans were common on board. These could last for weeks or even months without spoiling. But fresh water was an entirely different story. Water was stored in wooden barrels, which, although large, didn't preserve it well. The heat and humidity on board, especially in tropical regions like the Caribbean, quickly turned stored water into a warm, stagnant brew teeming with bacteria and algae. It wasn't long before it smelled foul, tasted worse, and posed a real risk of illness. An average sailor needed around a gallon of water per day just to survive, more in extremely hot conditions. On a pirate ship with a crew of 50, that meant needing at least 50 gallons of clean water every single day. When you factor in the unpredictable length of voyages and the lack of refrigeration or proper purification, you can begin to see the scale of the issue. In some cases, fresh water was even more valuable than gold. It wasn't uncommon for ships to change their course entirely based on the hope of finding a freshwater source. Word of a freshwater spring on a small, uncharted island could completely redirect a pirate voyage. While pirates might have been feared across the seas, they were still human, thirsty, hot, and desperate for clean water. Their reputation didn't mean much if their crew was too dehydrated to sail or fight. In desperate times, some pirates made a fatal mistake, trying to drink seawater. It's easy to imagine someone reaching that point after days under the burning sun with nothing to drink. But seawater contains about 3.5% salt, far too much for the human body to process. Drinking it only worsens dehydration. The kidneys need to flush out the salt by using even more water from the body, meaning you lose more fluids than you gain. It's a vicious cycle, and in many historical cases, it ended in severe illness or death. There are reports from the time of pirates mixing seawater with alcohol, particularly wine or rum, hoping the alcohol would neutralize the harmful effects. Unfortunately, it didn't. Alcohol, while it might kill some bacteria, doesn't cancel out the salt content. These mixtures often led to vomiting, further dehydration, and in some cases, complete breakdowns of discipline among the crew. It's not hard to imagine the chaos on a ship when half the crew is sick and the other half is furious over the mistake. Given how dangerous and unpredictable freshwater sources could be, pirates had to get creative. This need led to some genuinely smart thinking. While most pirate ships didn't carry advanced technology, they learned quickly from experience. They realized that water stored in wooden barrels turned foul faster if it was kept in direct sunlight or exposed to heat. So they stored water in the lowest parts of the ship, down in the hold, where it was cooler. This helped slow the growth of bacteria and algae, but it wasn't a perfect solution. Even down in the hold, the constant motion of the ship and the warm, damp conditions meant barrels could break loose or get contaminated. Wooden barrels, even well-made ones, weren't airtight or sterile. Once exposed to air, water became a breeding ground for all kinds of organisms. After just a few weeks at sea, it was common to find floating particles, green slime, and even small creatures in drinking water. This led to the term live water among some sailors because it quite literally contained living things. The problem with storing water wasn't just about contamination, it was also about quantity. Large barrels, called hogsheads, could hold around 60 to 65 gallons of water. A pirate ship, aiming for a month-long voyage with 50 crew members, would need at least 1,500 to 2,000 gallons of water. That meant dozens of heavy barrels occupying a significant part of the ship's storage space. And when storms or rough seas hit, these barrels could shift, break, or even roll overboard. Pirates sometimes secured barrels with ropes or built wooden enclosures, but it was still a risky and labor-intensive setup. Historical accounts show that water shortages weren't just an inconvenience, they shaped real decisions. Some pirate crews were known to avoid certain trade routes or delay attacks if they feared they didn't have enough water to last the trip. There are also stories of pirate ships altering their course to land on islands that weren't known for riches, but for having reliable springs or streams. It wasn't just unknown pirates facing these issues. Even the infamous ones dealt with it. Take Blackbeard, for example, one of the most feared pirates of the era. Most people remember his terrifying appearance or the smoking fuses in his beard. But he was also remarkably strategic about resources. He reportedly targeted ships known to be carrying fresh water, not just gold or spices. It shows how crucial water was. It was a top priority, even during raids. Stealing water wasn't just practical, it was a matter of survival. There's even a well-known account of a pirate ship crew that raided a small port town not to loot treasure but just to fill their empty barrels. According to the story, they took all the water they could find but left behind a small pouch of gold coins as compensation. Whether it was guilt or just recognition of the value of what they were taking, it shows that even pirates understood the importance of water. All of this adds up to a much more complex picture of pirate life than the usual myths. Their adventures weren't only about buried gold or battles with the Royal Navy. They were often about finding ways to survive with limited, fragile resources. None more important than drinking water. Fresh water was essential for life, and its absence shaped how pirate ships were run, how decisions were made, and how long voyages could last. Pirates might have been feared criminals at sea, but they were also sailors trying to live through incredibly tough conditions. And for them, the most critical battle wasn't always fought with cannons. It was fought every day, in the search for something as simple and as vital as a clean drink of water. While pirates were often seen as rough, violent, and unpredictable, surviving at sea required more than brute strength. When it came to staying hydrated, many pirate crews became surprisingly resourceful. Clean water wasn't something they could take for granted. With limited space, hot climates, and no access to modern storage or filtration systems, pirates had to develop clever ways to collect water, especially rainwater. When storm clouds gathered on the horizon, the atmosphere on board a pirate ship would instantly change. Rain wasn't just weather, it was opportunity. Crew members jumped into action, turning the ship into a floating rain-catching system. The sails, which were usually positioned to catch the wind, were adjusted to channel rainwater instead. Pirates had learned that with the right angle, the large sheets of canvas could act as funnels. Water would roll off the sails into wooden gutters or directly into barrels and containers placed on deck. Not all parts of the ship were equally useful for collecting clean water. Pirates quickly discovered that the sails toward the front of the ship collected the purest rain. These were less likely to be fouled by bird droppings or other debris. As a result, arguments sometimes broke out over who got to manage which part of the ship during rain collection. Everyone wanted access to the cleanest water. The ship's wooden railings and gutters, originally designed to direct seawater off the deck, were repurposed during storms. Pirates used them to guide fresh rainwater toward waiting barrels. In some cases, they even carved extra grooves into the wooden decking to improve flow. These makeshift channels helped maximize every drop of rainfall. Pirates didn't waste water if they could help it. They knew the next rain could be days or even weeks away. One particularly inventive tactic involved crew members using their clothing to collect water. Accounts describe pirates taking off their shirts and laying them across the deck to soak up rain. Once soaked, the cloth would be wrung out into barrels. Some would even hold their hats upside down to catch water directly. It might sound silly today, but when fresh water was scarce, every bit counted. Rain collection, however, wasn't always straightforward. Pirates had to be cautious during the first few minutes of a storm. The sails and surfaces of the ship were usually dirty, covered in salt spray, grime, and bird waste. If you started collecting too early, you'd end up with contaminated water. That's why experienced pirates would wait for a few minutes, letting the rain rinse off the dirt before placing barrels to collect. This process was often called letting the deck have its bath. It became an unspoken rule among crews that you didn't start collecting until the initial runoff had passed. There's also evidence that pirates had semi-formal systems for how rainwater was shared among the crew. While hierarchy still played a role, even the lowest ranked sailors were given access to drinking water. This was mostly out of necessity. A dehydrated crew couldn't function properly, and the risks of mutiny were always present. Any sign that a captain or officer was hoarding water could easily spiral into unrest. Despite these systems and creative methods, rain wasn't always reliable. In many parts of the Caribbean, rainfall can be inconsistent, especially during certain times of the year. When clouds disappeared for long stretches, pirate crews had to find other solutions. That often meant going ashore in search of water sources on land. The search for fresh water on islands was just as important as raiding treasure ships. In fact, some pirates kept maps that didn't show hidden gold or shipwrecks, but detailed information about freshwater springs, streams, or seasonal rainfall patterns. These water maps were guarded just as closely as any treasure chart. A good water source could mean the difference between life and death, especially during long voyages or after a storm-damaged supply. Pirates learned to read the landscape for signs of water. One of the most obvious indicators was plant life, but not just any greenery would do. For instance, while coconut palms look tropical and lush, they can actually grow in dry soil. Pirates focused instead on ferns, grasses, and vines like morning glory, which required consistent moisture to survive. These plants often pointed to underground springs or shallow groundwater. Another technique involved digging shallow wells along the coast. Pirates would move about 50 feet inland and dig into the sand, hoping to reach fresh groundwater before hitting salt water. The sand acted as a natural filter, helping to separate the salt from the fresh water. If done correctly, the well would slowly fill with drinkable water. These makeshift wells, known today as seepage wells, were surprisingly effective for short-term needs. But not all island expeditions went smoothly. There are reports of pirate crews capturing local guides and forcing them to reveal the locations of springs or streams. Sometimes this worked, but other times it backfired. One crew spent 3 days following a guide in circles, only to realize he was misleading them on purpose. Another group was led to a spring that turned out to be a crocodile nesting area. After several incidents like these, many pirate crews decided it was smarter to offer payment or trade in exchange for help, rather than rely on force. Some pirates also observed wildlife to help locate water. Birds, especially in the early morning or late afternoon, tend to follow regular patterns when searching for drinking water. If a crew saw a flock of birds flying inland at the same time each day, there was a good chance they were heading toward a freshwater source. One pirate captain even wrote in his journal that he followed a group of noisy parrots through the forest and found a hidden stream. Though he complained the birds squawked so much, it gave away their position. Another creative method involved collecting dew. Pirates would dig small holes in shaded areas, line them with large leaves, and wait for moisture to gather overnight. In the morning, the condensed water would drip into containers. It wasn't much, maybe just a cup or two per setup, but when combined across several stations, it could be enough to stretch supplies by an extra day or two. Fresh water once found had to be stored carefully. Pirates returned it to their barrels, which were often cleaned before reuse, but again, storage was never perfect. Contamination was always a concern, especially if a barrel had been exposed to heat or if it hadn't been sealed properly. Because of that, some crews developed their own techniques to extend the life of stored water, such as sealing barrels with tar, using resin to plug gaps, or even burying barrels in sand to keep them cool. The importance of water even influenced the timing of pirate raids. If a ship had been out at sea for too long without finding fresh water, captains might delay attacking a merchant vessel until they had restocked. After all, wounded or sick crew members needed clean water for recovery, and you couldn't fight effectively if half your crew was weak from dehydration. And there's a well-known account of a pirate ship called the Morning Star. During a particularly heavy storm, the crew managed to collect so much rainwater that they had more than 2 weeks worth of reserves. They were so relieved that they held a celebration, what they called a rain feast. Each crew member received an extra ration of water, which might not sound like much now, but at sea it was a luxury. For them, that extra water was more valuable than any gold coins they could have found. Some of the more experienced pirate captains became skilled at reading weather patterns. By watching cloud formation, sea currents, and even the behavior of birds and fish, they could estimate where storms were likely to form. In some cases, entire courses were adjusted just to move into the path of a developing storm, not for the thrill, but for the chance to collect rainwater. It's been suggested that some pirate navigators were as much amateur meteorologists as they were sailors. These clever, often improvised systems show how adaptable pirates were. For all their rebellious and lawless reputation, their ability to manage resources was crucial to survival. Without access to clean, drinkable water, their ships would have been no more than floating prisons. The battle for fresh water didn't involve swords or cannons, but it was just as vital. It shaped how pirates sailed, how they interacted with land, and how they dealt with the environment around them. Whether it was carving rain channels into their decks or following birds through dense jungle, pirates understood that water was the most valuable resource at sea. Gold may have gotten the glory, but without water, there wouldn't have been any pirates left to chase it. Once pirates managed to find fresh water, whether from rainfall, island springs, or clever collection tricks, their work wasn't over. In many ways, keeping water drinkable was an even bigger challenge than finding it. A barrel of fresh water might be clean on day one, but after sitting in the heat and humidity of a ship's hold for a week or two, things quickly changed. The reality was that water didn't stay fresh for long on board a wooden ship, and without proper preservation, it turned foul. Water was usually stored in large wooden barrels, often called hogsheads, which could hold over 60 gallons each. On a mid-sized pirate ship, you might find 30 or more of these barrels tucked into the hold. That added up to nearly 2,000 gallons of water necessary for feeding, drinking, washing, and cooking for a crew of 50 or more. But the barrels themselves weren't ideal for long-term storage. Wood is porous, which means it can leak, absorb moisture, and grow mold. Add in the tropical heat, the rocking motion of the ship, and the lack of sterilization methods, and you've got a recipe for rapid contamination. Pirates often referred to spoiled water as live water because of the visible organisms swimming in it. Algae, bacteria, and sometimes even small invertebrates would thrive inside the barrels. One pirate's journal from 1716 described it as drinking a mouthful of wiggling worms with every gulp. Not only was it unpleasant, but it could lead to serious illness. Diarrhea, fever, and dehydration were all common consequences of drinking spoiled water. In the worst cases, it led to death. To deal with this, pirates came up with a variety of methods to prolong the life of their water. One of the more effective techniques was charring the inside of water barrels. By lightly burning the interior wood, they created a layer of charcoal that helped block bacteria and reduce contamination. The idea was that the charred layer acted as a kind of filter, slowing the rot and reducing the bad taste. It was the same principle used in whiskey making, though pirates didn't exactly have aged bourbon in mind when they did it. Another technique that showed surprising insight was dropping silver coins into water barrels. Pirates didn't know about microbes, but they had learned through experience that barrels with silver tended to stay fresher for longer. Today, we know that silver has antimicrobial properties, which means it can kill or slow the growth of bacteria. By tossing a few silver coins into their water supply, pirates were unknowingly improving its safety. It's an example of folk knowledge lining up with modern science. Storage wasn't just about the barrels themselves. Pirates also focused on where and how they kept them. The lowest part of the ship, known as the hold, was the coolest area and therefore best for storing water. Cooler temperatures slowed the growth of bacteria and algae, but storing barrels below deck came with its own risks. The hold was also where the ship moved the most. If a barrel wasn't properly secured, it could roll during rough seas, sometimes crashing into other barrels or damaging the hull. Some crews tried wrapping barrels in wet sailcloth to keep them cool through evaporation, but this often led to mildew and rot. Others painted barrels white in an effort to reflect heat. Unfortunately, the white paint used in the 1700S contained lead, so while the water may have lasted longer, it came with a very different health risk. Beyond practical solutions, there are also some more superstitious approaches. Some pirate crews believed that bad water was caused by evil spirits or curses. To ward off these supposed forces, they performed blessing rituals over their barrels. One crew even hired a so-called water witch who chanted spells and danced around the barrels before sealing them. According to stories, the water from those barrels did stay fresh longer, but it's likely the witch was secretly adding charcoal or herbs behind the scenes. Superstition or not, any method that worked became part of their routine. When all else failed and water still went bad, pirates turned to their backup plans, often involving rudimentary filtration or even turning to alcohol. One of the most basic filtration methods involved stretching a piece of cloth over the top of a container and pouring the spoiled water through it. This didn't make the water safe, but it helped remove visible particles, insects, and algae. Some pirates used clean shirts, though clean was always a relative term on a ship. Over time, the cloth would become stained and green, making it look more like seaweed than fabric. More creative pirates experimented with multi-layer filtration. Inspired by natural water filtering systems found on tropical islands, they built filters using layers of sand, gravel, crushed seashells, and even broken pottery. One captain even claimed that filtering water through a layer of smashed pearls improved the taste. While these systems might have removed some debris, they did little to kill bacteria or prevent illness. A few crews tried to desalinate seawater through basic distillation. The process involved boiling seawater, catching the steam on cloths or metal plates, and wringing out the condensed water into clean containers. It was a lot of effort for very little return. Boiling enough seawater to make 1 cup of fresh water could require burning enough wood to cook a full meal. Still, when no other options existed, some pirates chose this method over the risks of drinking from spoiled barrels. There were also some rather questionable filtration ideas. One crew attempted to filter their water through dried tobacco leaves, believing the tobacco would kill bacteria. Instead, it just made the water taste like a mixture of swamp and ashtray. Unsurprisingly, no one repeated that experiment, but when citrus fruits were available, pirates sometimes squeezed them into their filtered water. Not only did this improve flavor, it also helped kill some bacteria and prevented scurvy. The vitamin C content in limes and lemons made a noticeable difference in the health of crews, though most pirates didn't understand why. They only knew that those who drank lime water stayed healthier. Perhaps the most successful and simple method involved letting bad water sleep. Pirates would allow spoiled water to sit undisturbed in a clean container. Over time, the heavier particles and organisms would sink to the bottom. The clearer water on top could then be carefully skimmed and drunk. It wasn't perfect, but it was safer than drinking the whole mix. Pirates called this sleeping water because it looked calm and still, though it took a bit of faith to drink it. Still, for many pirate crews, the most common solution to spoiled water was mixing it with alcohol, particularly rum. This led to the invention of grog, a drink that combined rum, water, and sometimes lime juice or sugar. The alcohol in the rum helped kill some of the bacteria in the water, while the lime juice added some nutrients and improved flavor. The mixture wasn't just for getting drunk, it was a form of water purification, long before the science behind it was understood. The drink was popularized by British Admiral Edward Vernon in 1740, who ordered that the Royal Navy's daily rum ration be diluted with water. Sailors began calling him Old Grog after the programmed cloak he wore, and the name stuck. Pirates quickly adopted the idea, creating their own versions with different ratios of rum to water. Some added spices or herbs for taste. One captain added mint and called it a Caribbean cocktail, long before the mojito was invented. Grog wasn't just a drink, it became a key part of daily life on pirate ships. It was used to manage water consumption, reduce illness, and even keep the peace. Each sailor received a specific grog ration per day, and captains could adjust the amounts to reward good behavior or punish bad conduct. There are records of pirates arguing fiercely over their daily grog, and even stories of mutinies sparked by watered-down rations. Despite its importance, grog wasn't loved by everyone. Some pirates complained that it made the water taste worse, while others said it made them sluggish. But for many, it was a necessary part of survival at sea. And even with grog, water remained a constant concern. Pirates had to continue rain catching, shore hunting, barrel sealing, and filtering, doing whatever they could to stretch their supplies.